Welcome back to the deep dive. It is Monday, January 26, 2026. And I want everyone listening to just take a second and look at that date. Really let it sink in.
Yeah.
January 26, 2026. We are living through a week that historians, they're going to be writing about this for the next century.
Oh, absolutely. The news cycle right now is, well, fire hose doesn't even begin to cover it.
No, it feels like the entire world is just holding its breath.
It does. It feels like one of those, hinge moments in history.
Yeah.
The kind where you wake up in a different world than the one you fell asleep in.
Exactly. And because the noise is so loud right now, because every headline is just screaming in all caps, we wanted to do something a little different today. We wanted to hit the pause button.
Step back from it.
Yeah, freeze the frame and actually look at the mechanics of what is happening rather than just reacting to the emotion of it all.
Which is so necessary.
Yeah.
Because if you just ride that emotional wave of the headlines, you miss the machinery. You miss the actual levers that are moving the world.
And to do that, we are diving into a piece of analysis that has been circulating in some very serious policy circles over the last 48 hours.
Right.
It comes from a source that, if you've been with us for a while, you know we keep a close eye on. The blog is called Barackface.
And I know.
I know, the name sounds like a meme account from 2012.
It does. But you really can't let the branding fool you on this one.
No, seriously, do not let the name throw you off. The post we're looking at is titled Iran Scenarios. And this isn't a hot take. It's not 280 characters of outrage or some partisan opinion piece shouting about whether intervention is good or bad.
No, this is a blueprint.
That's the word. It reads less like a blog and more like a classified war game simulation that someone left on a photocopier at the Pentagon and forgot to shred.
It's an operational manual. Yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it. It's this incredibly comprehensive scenario analysis for a hypothetical, well, increasingly less hypothetical U.S.-led intervention in Iran aimed at regime change. And what makes it so distinct, and frankly, so valuable for us today, is that it just ignores the moral arguments completely.
Skips them.
It focuses entirely on the how. It asks the really hard question, not can we win the war, but what happens the morning after the war ends?
And that is the question, isn't it? We are so obsessed with the invasion, but the source here argues that the invasion is just the opening credits. The movie is what happens next.
The part that lasts for decades.
So here's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack what the source calls the decision impact map.
Which is a fascinating concept. It's basically a flowchart for the future of the Middle East.
We're going to explore 5 distinct scenarios laid out in this document. They range from excellent, which I have to say sounds almost too good to be true,
It really does.
all the way to very bad, which is essentially a nightmare scenario for the entire planet.
Yeah.
We're going to break down the country region by region because, Iran is not a monolith. We're going to look at the terrifying math of the casualty estimates, and we're going to review the historical comparisons the source makes to Iraq, Libya, and this is the one that surprised me, Japan.
And that Japan comparison is the linchpin. It's the one piece of history that offers, maybe a glimmer of hope in what is otherwise a very, very daunting document.
So buckle up. We're going to go deep on this. Let's start with segment 1, the spectrum of possibility. The source divides the potential outcomes into 5 tiers. Scenario 1 is excellent. Scenario 5 is very bad.
And it's important to note, these aren't just random guesses. These are outcomes based on very specific variables: feasibility, risk, and most importantly, execution.
Okay, so let's start at the top. Scenario 1, the rapid, successful transition. This is the dream scenario. Paint the picture for us. In a perfect world, if every single thing goes right, what does this look like?
So in scenario 1, the military component is defined by one single word: precision. We aren't seeing, carpet bombing. We aren't seeing massive armored columns leveling cities like we saw in World War II.
No shock and awe in that sense.
No, not at all. It's a surgical degradation of Iran's command and control. The radar goes down first, then the missile sites are neutralized. The communications grid for the regime is just severed.
So the head is completely cut off from the body.
Exactly. And because of that precision, the capital, Tehran, falls within weeks, maybe even less. The source lists the conflict phase in this scenario as 0 to 3 months. It's a blip on the timeline.
But the defining feature here, it seems, isn't just that the war is won quickly. It's what the source calls the preservation of the state. What does that mean in practice?
This is critical. This is maybe the most important concept in the whole document. Preservation of the state means the lights stay on.
Okay.
It means the water keeps running. It means the garbage gets picked up. The basic functions of a society don't collapse.
So you're not starting from zero.
You are absolutely not starting from zero. In this scenario, the Ayatollah is either detained or he flees very, very early on. The symbolic head of the snake is removed. But here's the critical detail, and if you remember nothing else from scenario 1, remember this. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Basij are systematically dismantled, but
There's always a but.
Personnel without blood on their hands are retrained. They aren't fired. They aren't sent home in disgrace.
Okay, let's pause on that because that sounds like a minor HR detail, but the source argues this is the whole ball game, isn't it?
It is the entire game.
You're making a distinction between the ideologue, the guy who's there because he loves the regime and hates the West, and the technocrat, the guy who's just a civil engineer who happens to wear a uniform.
Right. Think about the IRGC. It's not just a paramilitary force. It's a massive business empire. They run construction companies. They run dams. They run telecommunications network.
They're embedded in the economy.
Deeply. You have thousands of colonels who are essentially, project managers and engineers. In scenario 1, you keep those guys. You say to them, okay, you used to build bridges for the Ayatollah. Guess what? Now you build bridges for the new Republic of Iran.
You integrate them into a professional, non-political military or civil service.
Exactly. You avoid creating a massive pool of unemployed, armed, angry men with extensive military training. That is how you stabilize the country. In this scenario, you get an interim government almost immediately, and it's composed of moderate reformists and these technocrats we're talking about. Within a year, you have a new democratic constitution.
And the source mentions federalism here as a key component of that new constitution.
Yes, federalism for ethnic minorities.
Yeah.
We need to unpack this because in the West, we often think of Iran as just Persian. But it's incredibly diverse. I mean, you have Kurds in the West, Baluchis in the southeast, Arabs in the southwest, Azeris in the north.
A patchwork.
It really is.
Yeah.
And in scenario 1, the new constitution gives them meaningful autonomy. It says you can speak your language, you can run your local schools, you can have a local police force. It diffuses the separatist impulse before it can even start.
So in this best-case outcome, Iran becomes a stable federal democracy, a bridge between East and West. It sounds idyllic.
It does.
But what is the probability the source assigns to this?
Low.
Chuckles. Low. Of course.
Low, but achievable with flawless execution.
Yeah.
That's the exact phrasing. It requires every single decision to go right. It requires the U.S. and its allies not to make a single unforced error.
So no room for mistakes.
None.
Okay, so let's step down a rung to something that feels a bit more like reality. Scenario 2, very good. The source subtitles this successful but messy.
This is probably the real-world best case, right?
Oh, yeah.
The campaign doesn't take weeks. It takes 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
You take moderate damage to U.S. forces. It's a real fight.
And the friction points are stickier.
Much stickier. The key variable here is the Ayatollah. In scenario 1, he's gone. He's captured or he flees. In scenario 2, he remains a symbolic figure.
What does that look like? Is he in a bunker somewhere, leading troops?
Probably not leading troops in the field, no. But maybe he's in a hidden location. Maybe he's moved to a safe house in the mountains. He's issuing audio tapes. He's putting out fatwas on Telegram. He's become a ghost, a symbol of resistance. He hasn't been fully neutralized.
And I imagine that slows down everything that comes after.
It slows down everything, the reconstruction, the politics, all of it. Dismantling the IRGC is slower because some units hear his voice and decide, we're going to keep fighting. You have rogue factions attempting coups. Social unrest persists in the hardline areas, the places where the regime had its strongest support.
And what about the rest of the world? How do they react in this scenario?
This is where the vultures start to circle.
Russia and China.
Exactly. In scenario 1, the transition is so fast and so clean, they don't really have time to react. It's a done deal. In scenario 2, because there's this period of weak governance, they start playing games.
What kind of games?
Well, maybe Russia starts slipping sophisticated anti-tank weapons to a warlord in the East. Maybe China comes in and leverages energy contracts to buy influence with a weak interim government. They exploit the messiness.
But ultimately, the outcome is still very good. Iran stabilizes.
It does eventually. It just takes a few years, there's more bloodshed, and it hurts a lot more.
It sounds like the difference between a clean surgery and a surgery where the patient survives, but they need a year of intense, painful physical therapy afterward.
That's a great analogy. It's a bruised success. You got there, but it wasn't pretty.
Now we start sliding down the slope. Scenario 3. Good. which, reading the description good, feels like a very generous grade here.
It chuckles. It really does.
The source calls this protracted, limited success.
Yeah. Good is very much a relative term at this point.
Yeah.
We are talking about what the source calls the slide. The military campaign drags on for 1 to 2 years.
So we're well past surgical strikes now.
Oh, yeah. Now we are talking about major cities seeing actual significant destruction. Blocks leveled, infrastructure smashed. Think Fallujah, but on a much larger scale.
And what happens to the government in this version of the future?
It's weak. It's incredibly weak. You get an interim government, but it really can't project its power past the suburbs of Tehran. The provinces start falling under the control of local warlords.
Warlords. That's a very scary shift in terminology from the previous scenarios.
It's a fundamental shift. It means the central government passes a law, and the guy running the province in the east just ignores it because he has more guns than the local police. It's the beginning of de facto fragmentation.
And the economy.
The economy is where you see the brain drain.
That heartbreaking phenomenon where the young, the educated, the ambitious, they just leave.
They look around, they see rubble, they see hyperinflation, they see black markets controlling everything, and they say, there is no future for me or my children here. So the doctors, the engineers, the teachers, the very people you need to rebuild the country, they emigrate.
And once they leave, it is incredibly hard to get them back.
Almost impossible.
Mm.
In scenario 3, federalism, that idea of giving regions autonomy that works so well in scenario 1, it fails completely. It doesn't unify the country, it fractures it. It becomes a legal justification for warlords to carve out their own fiefdoms.
So you end up with only partially democratic institutions. It's a muddle-through scenario.
At best. It's a country that's permanently scarred and unstable.
Okay, now we cross the line into the real danger zone, scenario 4. Bad. The subtitle is Failed or Stalled Transition.
This is the quagmire. This is the Vietnam scenario, the Afghanistan scenario. Guerrilla warfare, IEDs, drone attacks continuing for years and years.
And the political side is where it really falls apart.
Completely.
Yeah.
Elections are held, but they fail. Or they're so obviously manipulated that no one believes the results. Democracy exists only on paper.
So it's a sham republic, a puppet state run by whoever has the most guns.
Essentially.
Mm.
And humanitarian-wise, you're looking at widespread famine and disease. The water treatment plants aren't fixed. The hospitals don't have consistent power. International aid can't get to where it's needed because the roads are too dangerous.
And this isn't contained within Iran's borders anymore.
No, geopolitically, this spills over. It's not just Iran's problem. It spills into Iraq, into Afghanistan, into the Gulf. Russia and China aren't just meddling anymore. They're actively exploiting the chaos to undermine U.S. interests across the entire region. It becomes a proxy war playground.
And finally, we arrive at the bottom. Scenario 5, the very bad scenario. The source subtitles this, Iraq, Afghanistan 2.0 or worse.
And the or worse is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that phrase.
I was going to say,
This is total, absolute collapse. A multi-year, maybe decade-long war. Iran's territory fragments into pieces held by various insurgent groups, ethnic militias, and former regime loyalists.
so there's no central authority at all.
Not one that has any real meaning. Warlords and former IRGC commanders fight for control of cities, oil fields, and border crossings. The economy enters hyperinflation. The currency becomes worthless.
And the human cost.
Mass refugee crises. We're talking millions of people pouring across the borders into Turkey, into Pakistan, into Europe. It would dwarf the Syrian refugee crisis. And the source explicitly calls this a failed state outcome, where Iran becomes a breeding ground for two things: nuclear proliferation and terrorism.
Nuclear proliferation. That's the nightmare card. Loose nukes.
Well, not necessarily loose nukes, but loose nuclear material. If the central authority collapses, who is guarding the centrifuges at Natanz? Who has the keys to the research facilities? In scenario 5, nobody knows. It becomes a black market free-for-all for the most dangerous materials on Earth.
And what does the source say is the probability for this one?
It says there is a high risk of this happening, specifically if the U.S. underestimates the resilience and the deep-rooted nature of the IRGC.
It's just chilling to see it all laid out like that. It's not just win or lose. It's this sliding scale of functionality from a modern democracy to a black hole.
A black hole that could swallow the entire region.
And time seems to be a huge factor in all of this. The source has this section on phase-based timelines.
Right, the when of the
It
operation.
breaks it down into 4 phases: conflict, transition, reconstruction, democracy. But what really jumped out at me is this concept of time dilation. Can you explain that?
It's a fascinating idea. The source argues that these phases aren't fixed blocks of time, like, 3 months for this, a year for that. They stretch or shrink depending on which scenario you find yourself in.
So time moves differently in each scenario.
Exactly. In scenario one, the conflict phase is 0 to 3 months. It's a blip. The transition phase is also short. You achieve a functioning democracy in 1 to 3 years. It's incredibly compressed.
But in scenario 5,
In scenario 5, the conflict phase is listed as 36 months plus, 3 years or more of active high-intensity war, and you never really leave it.
in the democracy phase, what's the timeline for that?
The source just lists it as impossible.
Wow, impossible. Not decades, not unlikely, just impossible.
Because you never get out of the conflict and transition loop. You get stuck in a permanent cycle of violence and instability. You can't build a democracy when the house is constantly on fire.
That brings us to the milestones and risks within these phases. The transition phase seems to be the most critical moment. This is that window right after the major fighting stops, but before a new government is stable.
The source calls this the golden hour. It's that moment of maximum opportunity and maximum danger. The risk here is the dismantling of militias versus the rise of rogue commanders. It's a power vacuum.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
It certainly does in post-conflict states. If you don't fill that vacuum with something legitimate and credible like a technocratic interim government, something dangerous will fill it for you. A warlord, an ethnic militia, an extremist group.
And then in the reconstruction phase, the source points to this dangerous gap between lifting sanctions and actual economic recovery.
They call it the expectations gap. Think about it from the perspective of the average Iranian. The day the war ends and sanctions are lifted, they expect their life to get better immediately.
Of course, that's the promise.
But rebuilding a shattered economy takes years. If that gap between expectation and reality is too big, if life stays hard for too long, nostalgia for the old regime can actually kick in.
At least the trains ran on time argument.
Precisely. People might forget the oppression and only remember the stability, however brutal it was. And in the final democracy phase, the source specifically mentions a constituent assembly. This isn't just about holding an election for a president. It's about building the entire rule book for the new country.
And the risk there is that residual factions, old loyalists or new extremists, try to hijack the process.
They try to write a constitution that benefits their group at the expense of everyone else. If that happens, you get scenario 4, a democracy in name only.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk geography because this is fascinating. Segment 3, the geographical deep dive. As you said, Iran is massive. It's mountainous, it's ethnically diverse. You can't just treat it as one monolithic block.
No, and the source breaks this down beautifully. It's not just a military map, it's a map of political and social risks.
Let's start with the obvious one, Tehran, the political center, the capital.
Tehran is the center of gravity. Everything revolves around it. In scenario 1, it falls quickly with minimal damage. But in scenario 5, it becomes a devastated urban warfare zone, a modern-day Stalingrad.
And the source notes that high civilian casualties in Tehran are a massive predictor of failure. Why specifically Tehran?
2 reasons. First, that's where the global media is. Images of a destroyed Tehran will turn international public opinion against the intervention instantly. Second, that's where the country's political and economic elite live. If you destroy their homes and businesses, you lose any chance of co-opting them to help you rebuild. If you destroy Tehran to save it, you've already lost.
Then you have Mashhad and Khorasan in the northeast. This is a reason most of us in the West, we don't hear about it on the nightly news very often.
But it's absolutely crucial. This is the religious heartland of Shia Islam in Iran. This is the support base for the Ayatollah and the clerical establishment.
So even if Tehran falls, Mashhad might not. It could hold out.
It could become the center of the resistance. The dynamics here are incredibly tricky. In scenario 1, you co-opt the moderate clerics there. You persuade them to issue statements saying the old regime was corrupt, but Islam is still safe under the new government. You use their religious authority to calm the population.
In the worst scenarios.
In scenario 4 or 5, Mashhad becomes the headquarters for the insurgency. The Ayatollah, or his chosen successor, leads a holy war from the northeast, framing the intervention not as a political change, but as an attack on Islam itself.
Then there's Isfahan and the Central Plateau. The source identifies this as the industrial and tech hub.
Right. This is where the factories are, the high-tech industries, the defense industrial base. The stakes here are simple. Preserving that industry versus having the factories looted and destroyed. If you want scenario 1, you need those factories up and running on day 2 to employ people and produce goods.
Now, this one really caught my eye. Khuzestan in the southwest. The source has a literal equation in the text. It says, Khuzestan plus Tehran is fate of the state.
Because that's the oil. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Khuzestan is where the vast majority of Iran's oil and gas reserves are. It also borders Iraq and has a large ethnic Arab population, which has its own history of grievances with the Persian-dominated state.
So the risks there are huge.
They're existential. The nightmare scenario is twofold. One, the retreating IRGC sabotages the pipelines and oil wells, setting them on fire like Saddam did in Kuwait. Two, local ethnic Arab militias seize the oil fields for themselves and refuse to cooperate with the new government in Tehran.
And if that happens?
If that happens, you have no money for reconstruction. No money means no stability. Khuzestan is the wallet of Iran. If you lose the wallet, the new state goes bankrupt before it's even born.
And Sistan and Baluchistan in the southeast, on the border with Pakistan.
This is the Wild East. It's a largely Sunni region, very tribal, with a long history of insurgency against the central government. The dynamic here is tribal militias who trust no one.
And the risk is that it becomes a safe haven.
Exactly. A safe haven for insurgents, for al-Qaeda, for anyone who wants to cause trouble. It's like the border regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan. If the central government is weak, like in scenario 4 or 5, this region just breaks away and becomes a lawless zone where terrorists can train and plan attacks.
And finally, the southern ports. Places like Bandar Abbas and Bushehr.
These are the country's economic lifelines to the outside world. They're strategic for trade. If the remnants of the Iranian Navy resist or sabotage the ports, you can't import food, you can't import medicine, and you can't export oil. It chokes the country.
It really highlights how fragile the idea of a unitary state is in Iran. If you lose control of the periphery, the center just collapses.
And that leads us directly to the human toll, which is, it's just brutal to read. Segment 4, the human and economic toll. The numbers in this source are staggering.
They really are.
Yeah.
The gap between Scenario 1 and Scenario 5 is hard to wrap your head around. In Scenario 1, they estimate 5,000 to 15,000 civilian deaths, which, let's be very clear, is a profound tragedy. That is thousands of families destroyed.
It is. It's a horrible number. But then you look at scenario 5.
500,000 to over 1 million civilian deaths.
That is a genocide-level event. That is a humanitarian catastrophe that defines a generation. And the source explicitly states, quote, civilian casualties are the single strongest predictor of failure.
Why is that? Why is that the one metric that predicts everything else?
It's not just a moral issue. It's a cold, hard, strategic one. It's the insurgency math. If you kill one innocent civilian in an airstrike, you might create 3 new insurgents, their brother, their father, their son, who now have a blood debt to settle.
So every mistake multiplies.
Exponentially. If you kill 100,000 civilians, you cannot build scenario 1. It is no longer possible. You have created too many enemies. You cannot build a democracy on a foundation of mass graves. The legitimacy is gone forever.
And the economic losses follow that exact same terrifying curve. Scenario 1 is around $200 billion. Scenario 5 is over $3 trillion.
$3 trillion. That's an incomprehensible amount of money. That's like wiping out the entire GDP of a major European power like France or the UK. And the reconstruction time goes from a manageable 3-5 years to, and this is the quote, indefinite.
Indefinite. That's a haunting word to see in a policy paper.
It means the country effectively ceases to function as a modern economy. It's a return to a pre-industrial state in some areas.
There's a fascinating section here about the IRGC and Basij loyalty map. It talks about something called a decision tree for these forces because, as you said, the IRGC isn't just a military, it's a political and economic empire.
That's the key. We just on this earlier, but the source argues that success or failure depends entirely on splitting ideology from technical competence. The IRGC has brilliant engineers, doctors, logistics experts. They also have fanatical, violent ideologues.
But the goal is to surgically peel them apart.
Precisely. You create an off-ramp. You offer amnesty and retraining to the technocrats. You say to an engineer, you can keep your pension, you can keep your job, just help us rebuild the bridge. But if you do a blanket purge, if you fire everyone who ever wore an IRGC uniform, you create an instant, well-trained, and deeply resentful insurgent army.
Which is exactly what happened in Iraq with de-Baathification.
It is the single biggest lesson from Iraq. We'll get to that historical comparison in a moment. But first, we need to look at segment 5, the U.S. Decision Impact Map. This is what the source calls the control panel.
I love this concept. It's not just one big decision, invade or not invade. It's breaking down the intervention into a series of smaller levers, strategic, operational, political.
Right. Let's start with the strategic levers. The first one is targeting. If you use precision campaigns that only target command centers and military assets, you reduce civilian casualties, which pushes you towards scenario 1.
But if you start overbombing civilian areas because you think IRGC fighters are hiding there,
You push yourself directly towards scenario 3, 4, or 5. It seems obvious, but in the fog of war, that discipline is incredibly hard to maintain.
and the next strategic lever is leadership. The source says capturing or neutralizing the Ayatollah early removes the symbolic center of resistance. But if you fail,
If you fail, or if you kill him in a way that looks like a martyrdom, say a drone strike on his family home, you create a martyrdom effect. He becomes more powerful and influential in death than he ever was in life. You want him to look like a failed politician being led away in handcuffs, not a religious saint ascending to heaven.
then you have the operational levers. The first is troop levels.
This is the Goldilocks problem. Too many troops, and it looks like a brutal foreign occupation, which destroys your legitimacy. But if you have too few forces on the ground, you can't secure the cities, and pockets of IRGC resistance can fester and grow.
So you have to get it just right.
Just right. The source suggests minimal conventional forces combined with empowering local, vetted allies is the best path to improving legitimacy.
And the other operational lever is infrastructure.
This is absolutely vital. Protecting the ports, the oil refineries, and especially the water treatment plants is crucial for preventing civil unrest. If people in Tehran are thirsty, they don't care about your new constitution, they riot. Basic needs come first.
Which brings us to the political levers. This one seems to be the most nuanced and maybe the most difficult. The first is governance.
The source is adamant about this. You must install a pre-built interim government with respected technocrats and minority representation immediately, on day 2. You cannot wait a month to fly in some exiles from Paris to figure out who is in charge.
Because the vacuum will be filled.
Instantly. You have to walk in with the organizational chart for the new government already filled out.
And what about sanctions? How do you handle those?
This is a delicate dance. It's a carrot and a stick. You offer phased relief from sanctions tied to specific, verifiable reforms. That incentivizes cooperation. If you just give unconditional, immediate relief, you open the door to massive corruption. But if you delay relief for too long, the population gets restless because they don't feel the economic benefit of the change.
And the last political lever here is federalism.
Implementing it early, making a credible promise of autonomy, reduces the risk of regional insurgency. You tell the Kurds, you will have a say in your own affairs, and that might stop them from fighting for total independence, which would fracture the country.
There's one more here. Psychological ops.
Right. The importance of media freedom and avoiding heavy-handed propaganda. You have to win the narrative war, not just the physical war. If the new state-run TV looks and sounds just like the old regime's TV, people will tune out.
So we've got the scenarios, the map, the levers. Now let's look at the history books. Segment 6, Historical Comparative Analysis. The source compares a potential Iran 2026 to 3 very different historical events. Iraq 2003, Libya 2011, and Japan 1945.
This is the most intellectual and maybe the most important part of the entire analysis. It's looking for patterns in the past to avoid mistakes in the future.
Let's start with the bad examples. Iraq 2003. What's the core lesson there, according to the source?
The mistake was one word: de-Baathification. Disbanding the entire Iraqi army. They fired everyone, from generals down to low-level administrators. That single decision led directly to the Sunni insurgency.
Because you created an army of unemployed soldiers.
An army of unemployed, humiliated, and armed men. The solution for Iran, according to the source, is the complete opposite. You co-opt the IRGC technocrats. You only remove the top-level ideologically committed leaders. You don't make the same mistake twice.
And what about Libya 2011?
The mistake there was the power vacuum after Gaddafi fell. You had all these different rebel-led councils and militias who couldn't agree on anything. It led to total chaos and civil war.
So the lesson is about governance.
It's about having a plan for day 2. The solution for Iran is that pre-planned interim government we talked about. You walk in with a government in waiting, ready to take over immediately, so there's no vacuum for warlords to fill.
Okay, now for the surprising one. Japan 1945. This is presented as the ideal template.
Which is counterintuitive for many people, right? Because Japan was a total war that ended with nuclear weapons. But the success of the American occupation lay in 2 key decisions.
What were they?
First, retaining the Japanese bureaucracy. The Americans didn't fire every civil servant. They used the existing government ministries to run the country. Second, and most critically, keeping the emperor as a symbolic figurehead.
The emperor remained, but his power was stripped.
Exactly. The U.S. didn't execute Emperor Hirohito as a war criminal. They understood he was seen as a divine figure by many Japanese, so they used his authority to legitimize the transition to democracy. They had him announce the surrender and endorse the new constitution.
So how does that apply to Iran? You can't just keep the Ayatollah.
No, but the principle is the same. The source argues Iran can emulate the Japan model if the technocratic class is integrated and the economy is stabilized early. It's about using the existing non-ideological structures of the state to build the new state. Maybe you integrate some moderate clerics into the new system to give it religious legitimacy. You don't try to build a new country from scratch.
So the visual here is Japan represents high legitimacy and using existing structures. Iraq and Libya represent power vacuum and starting from zero.
Yes, and the source argues that for scenario 1 to happen, you must follow the Japan script, not the Iraq script. It's a lesson about statecraft, not just warfare.
This leads us to the final segment, which really ties it all together. Segment 7, the master scenario logic, the core insight.
And this is a quote that I think everyone should just sit with for a moment. Iran does not fail because it is invaded. It fails if legitimacy collapses faster than fear.
That is a profound statement. Say that again. Legitimacy collapses faster than fear.
Fear wins wars. You can bomb a military into submission, but legitimacy is what wins a state. You can't govern a country of 85 million people by fear forever. Eventually, they need to believe in the new system.
So scenario 1 isn't about having the biggest bombs or the most troops.
Not at all. It's about speed, symbolism, and credibility. It's about convincing the Iranian people, from the shopkeeper in Isfahan to the farmer in Kurdistan, that this new reality is better, safer, and more prosperous than the old one. And you have to convince them of that very, very fast.
The source boils this entire complex analysis down to 5 decisions that matter most. Let's run through them quickly. Number 1, what happens to the Ayatollah?
Quiet removal versus martyrdom. You want him forgotten, not immortalized.
Number 2, who governs on day 2?
A credible technocratic coalition versus a group of out-of-touch exiles who haven't lived in Iran for 20 years.
Number 3, how fast is money restored to the people?
Phased, visible economic relief versus delays. If the ATM machines stop working for a while, you lose. It's that simple.
Number 4, how are the ethnic minorities handled?
Genuine federalism versus repression. If you try to force the Kurds and the Baluchis and the Arabs into a Persian-only box, they will fight you.
And the final one, number 5, is security visible and fair?
Order and professional policing versus collective punishment. If the new security forces act just like the old hated Basij, then for the average person, nothing has actually changed.
So after all this, what does this all mean? We've looked at the map, the history, the numbers, the decision points. What's the final takeaway?
It means that the difference between a stable democratic Iran, a potential ally, a bridge between East and West, and a global catastrophe that will destabilize the world for a generation, that difference lies in the nuance of execution.
It's not about the shock and awe of the invasion.
No, it's about how you treat a mid-level manager in the Ministry of Energy. It's about whether a Kurdish shopkeeper feels that her language and culture are respected in the new constitution. It's about the small things that build legitimacy.
The devil is truly in the detail.
And the ghost of history is watching over your shoulder the entire time. The source leaves us with this final, very provocative implication. The United States' ability to achieve a Scenario 1 outcome depends entirely on whether it has learned the lessons of Japan in 1945, rather than simply repeating the disastrous scripts of Iraq 2003 and Libya 2011.
It's a deeply sobering thought. We often think of history as something that's in the past, something we study, but here it's literally the playbook for the future.
Absolutely. If we don't learn from it, we are doomed to repeat it. And in this case, the cost of repetition is almost too high to contemplate.
Well, that is a lot to digest. The sheer scale of the variables, the fragility of the entire enterprise, it's just mind-boggling. But it gives you a completely different perspective on what a phrase like regime change actually entails. It's not an event, it's a process.
An incredibly dangerous, delicate process.
A process where the margin for error is effectively zero.
That's right.
Thank you for walking us through this. This has been, well, heavy, but absolutely fascinating.
My pleasure. It's a critical document to understand.
And to our listener, thank you for sticking with us through the scenarios, the maps, and the hard truths. We hope this gave you a new lens, a new framework to view the news through in the coming days and weeks. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions.